8 and 9 learning targets out. If you don't have those paper copies, folks, remember I posted all those on my website, so you can, feel free to look them up at any time. But that's what we're just going to be reviewing in these live sessions until the AP test. It's in exactly 1 month on April 15th, and we're doing that one short DBQ, as you guys know. So yeah, I'll just jump right into it. Let's start the screen share, present. There we go, share. Cool. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen right now?
We can see it.
Sweet, thank you. Cool. So here are the 8 learning targets. We went over all of this yesterday, folks, except for the very last learning target. And this is one I want to start off with today. I think it's, a really important one for this time period. Obviously, we're still in the 1820s and into the 1830s, and this is the Second Great Awakening. It's a lot like the First Great Awakening, but it comes, roughly 90 years later. So let's start off by talking about similarities between the two, and then we'll talk about differences. So just like the First Great Awakening, guys, this is a Protestant evangelical movement. And you have to know what that word evangelical means. It means born again. This is someone who believes that you just simply have to ask God into your heart to get into heaven, essentially. It's a different direction than the way traditional Christianity in the form of Calvinism or Catholicism or various other older traditional sects. I'm not a religious lecturer, guys. I don't frankly know that much about it, but I know enough to be able to explain that this idea about asking God into your heart and you can just, have him forgive your sins and go to heaven, that's, relatively new for the American citizens. And the idea that the government is not going to have a state-sponsored religion is really encouraging people to take this idea that, I can talk to God and come up with my own interpretation of the Bible. I don't necessarily, we've had people saying I don't need the clergy for a while. That idea is not necessarily new, but it's going to take on a new significance in the 1820s, guys. This is where we're going to have dozens and dozens of new Protestant sects created. I don't even know the names of most of them. I can rattle off like 7 or 8, the Unitarians. Well, actually, maybe I can't even rattle off 7 or 8. A lot of the ones that you think of, like Baptists, those are already on the scene. Methodists are already on the scene. I guess I'm having a brain fart, and the Unitarians are the only Protestant sect I can think of created in the 1830s. Mormonism is another Protestant sect. I guess Mormonism doesn't count as a Protestant sect, but please be aware, Mormonism, guys, is a facet of the Second Great Awakening. Mormons, again, believe in Jesus Christ to an extent. This is not a lecture on Mormonism. I'm just trying to help you understand that the Second Great Awakening, guys, results in an offshoot of new Protestant denominations. If you see any question about the Second Great Awakening, I want you to first start thinking about new Protestant denominations. I guess I can take 5 seconds and pull up Wikipedia just so we can have more than just Unitarians and Mormons at our disposal. But let's do Protestant denominations. Oh, I spelled that really wrong. And let's just look at the Wikipedia, guys. And again, you don't have to be experts in this in any way, shape, or form. I'm just trying to give you a basic idea of how many branches of this religion there are, and a huge amount of them can be traced to the Second Great Awakening. 18th and 19th century Americans here.
Mahoney?
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you
Shoot.
still sharing your screen?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. Oh, I don't know. I can't.
I want to be.
Oh.
Am I still sharing it?
There you are.
Yeah, good. I was trying to help you. I was hoping that you could see some of the stuff on Wikipedia I was looking at real quick.
Oh, I guess my computer's weaker.
Oh, okay. Thanks for letting me know. I'll just get back to it. Anyhow, I don't need to spend much more time on that. I was just hoping I could find it real quick. So the first thing about Second Great Awakening, guys, is new Protestant denominations. That also occurs during the First Great Awakening. But again, the characteristic is the creation of new Protestant denominations, because I can interpret the Word of God for myself. Another characteristic that will be really kind of unique to the Second Great Awakening, it's not really a factor of the First Great Awakening, is going to be social reform movements. This is where the abolition movement will become very popular. This is where things like temperance, reforming prisons, we're going to see our earliest forms of state-sponsored mental asylums and the reform of those institutions come about. This is where you've really got middle-class men and women will play a huge role in these reform movements, saying that we should try to make society like something that God would be proud of. If, we can improve our own lives as evangelical Christians, why can't we improve the society we see around us? And they start looking at all these negatives, whether it's alcoholism and domestic abuse, or whether it's the fact that slavery is prevalent. And they say, I want to reform this. And so that's what I also want you guys to recognize about the Second Great Awakening is the connection to social reform movements. The easiest two to remember are abolition and temperance. And the reason I pick those two folks is because they have long-lasting impacts. You can say things like prison reform, but that's all you can really say about it. We can talk about temperance, guys, all the way up until the 1920s. There's going to be different pushes throughout our nation's history to ban alcohol, ultimately culminating with that constitutional amendment. So that's why I pick it. And obviously, the significance of slavery in the nation's history. So those are the two easiest reforms to remember. So when you see Second Great Awakening, it's really easy to just start ticking this off in your head. Oh, I remember that. That's that evangelical movement. People are asking God to come into their heart for forgiveness, and they're kind of creating new, Protestant religions, whether it's Mormons or Unitarians, and they are also participating in social reform movements like abolition and temperance. That's just a way to condense it, guys. Obviously, there are more details than that, but that's the basics I want you to remember. There are all sorts of specific characters that you could see speeches from. If you're given a DBQ, they could ask you guys a DBQ about this First and Second Great Awakenings. The topic is broad enough to where you could address it. And so please be aware of what the Second Great Awakening is. Anyone have any questions on it? I'm not going to say too much more else on it. Anyone have any questions? Cool. And remember, folks, go ahead.
If you saw the Second Great Awakening on the AP test, would it be typically within the DBQ? Would you use that as evidence for something? It was a bigger question they're asking, or would they ever specifically ask just on that?
So a DBQ like that, Aaron, would probably be a prompt analyze the impacts of the Second Great Awakening on the United States. And then they would give you 5 documents, because remember, they used to do 7, but now that we're doing the short, condensed, modified AP test, I'm going to call it the Corona DBQ. Now that we're doing the Corona DBQ, we're only getting 5 documents. So I would think that you would have one document talking possibly about creating a new religion like Mormonism. Then we might have another document talking about, reforming slavery. Then another document talking about reforming, or banning alcohol sales. And you would be expected to be, you'd be expected to interpret those. I see a question. Did the Second Great Awakening bring economic growth or significant funds to the church? That's a good question. And I don't actually know if I have the answer to that, Haley. Remember, the state can't compel you to pay your church any taxes. That's a stark different from England. Now, a lot of people who are church members, guys, the church preaches that you should voluntarily pay, and a lot of church members willingly tithe 10%. So churches get their income, most of their income from donations and also being tax exempt now. But the state cannot compel you to pay tax to the church. So that's a good question, Haley. I don't believe it results necessarily in more money for the churches other than new membership. We will see these churches grow in membership. So kind of by definition, that means more people donating. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud with kind of trying to use some circular logic here. You could argue that it does have an economic impact on these different evangelical branches because they're going to get a ton of new members, guys. This really cements Protestant Christianity as the religion in the United States. Yeah, you can be Catholic, you can be Jewish, you can certainly be atheist, but Protestant Christianity is going to dominate. And, you guys have many examples of that, and we'll talk about connections with that all the way through the 1920s. Remember the 1920s and the debate of fundamentalism versus modernism? It's still ideas about Protestant values being dominant. And that doesn't mean those values are bad or wrong. I agree with 95% of those Protestant values, just anyhow, on the record. Keep on rolling along. I'm sure if we were to look at my slides, and I could pull those up for 15 seconds here, looking at my slides for Second Great Awakening. I know I covered the big bullet points I wanted you to remember, new Protestant denominations and reform movements, but I just want to peek at my slides and make sure I didn't really miss anything I wanted to for Second Great Awakening. Sorry, thanks for bearing with me, folks. Abolition. Blah, 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 no. Oh, I got another. This is an important point, folks. The connection between African Americans and the Second Great Awakening. It always shocks me that slave owners would allow their African American slaves to attend these services, because if I'm a slave owner, I don't really want my slaves hearing messages about, eternal life and how we're all God's children. But nevertheless, many slaves are permitted to attend these Second Great Awakening revivals, and this will really cement Southern Baptism as the religion of American slaves. Obviously, certain elements of Afro-Caribbean religion, certainly elements of African tribal religions will be part of slave religion for a period of decades, folks. But obviously, the connection now is fully Protestant in the Southern Baptist Church. Again, I'm not a religious scholar. I can't really help you understand how slave religion evolves from tribal African religion to Afro-Caribbean religion to Protestantism, but just be aware that evolution does happen. And it's partially because of the Second Great Awakening. Remember, African-American slaves, guys, are going to really look to the biblical stories of like Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, out of bondage from Pharaoh, and really kind of apply that to themselves. When your life is, really kind of crappy, you tend to apply, stories about a reward waiting for you in the future as something to look forward to. And that's kind of what the Christian message is all about. I might be a slave, but all I got to do is, accept Jesus into my heart and be a good person, and I got something waiting for me, a heavenly reward waiting for me. And so again, the biblical stories and the heavenly afterlife, the story resonates with a lot of African American slaves. And again, Southern Baptism will be the sect that they generally identify with in this era right here. Cool. That's the only thing I wanted to really touch on that. I'm glad I looked that up. Cool. I know that the lecture slides has links to some YouTube videos called Religion in America. If you really want the details about it, you can, but it's not necessary. Ladies playing a prominent role in those reform movements. Okay. So I believe I covered everything I wanted to on 8. I'm going to go into 9 for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll stop there, folks. Fortunately for us, number 9, it has a lot of overlap with 8, guys. A lot of 9 just goes into more detail on the market revolution. And trust me, you don't honestly need all of these details. If you understand what the market revolution is, it's a combination of new technological improvements, increasing our productivity, both in agriculture and in manufacturing. Add that to government policies about federally funded improvements and ideas about federal business loans and things like that. And you have a modern manufacturing economy. We're not an economy, based on small farms, guys. We're an economy based on trade. And this chapter just goes into more detail of that. It talks more about things like the division of labor. But you guys already understand things about how the assembly line works. I don't really have to go into a lot of detail on the business models. I think we're going to talk more about business models again in the 1780s and 1790s when we talk about like our Rockefellers and our Carnegies. But let's talk with the Lowell factory girls, guys. Any essay that asks about the changing role of women in this country should include the Lowell factory girls. Frankly, guys, any mention of the market revolution, like those are 2 huge topics, and either one of those topics should mention the Lowell factory girls. Now, remember what the Lowell system is. It's a textile system. They're using water-powered wheels in rural Massachusetts. And guys, these are the people who are purchasing slave cotton. They are making the t-shirts that Americans are wearing. Now, people don't generally make their own clothing at home. You tend to buy your clothing produced in factory by the 1830s. And this is what the Lowell factory does. They employ young women. And the reason why you use this example on an essay about women is because this is where we start to see women enter the economic workforce in larger numbers, and it's starting to be socially acceptable. Guys, before the 1830s, if you're a woman and you had a job, it was probably in domestic service in some way, shape, or form. You probably went into someone else's house and worked. That was acceptable. Women could do that in the 16 and 1700s. You could work in domestic work. But you couldn't really work in other economic spheres, guys, and have it be socially acceptable. By the 1830s, that has started to shift, and it's now not really frowned upon to be a female laborer in a factory. It's not viewed as glorious. Certainly upper-class people probably frown on it, but it's socially acceptable for women to enter that economic sphere. So that's the first thing the Lowell factory girls do. They experience a new economic sphere that they can enter into. They also start getting their own pay for the first time. Now, guys, depending on the state law, certain women can own, women can own property in certain states. In certain states, they're not entitled to their paychecks if they are married or if they're like underage. If you're married, your paycheck might go to your husband. If you're underage, it might go to your father. So be aware that although the Lowell factory system represents a step forward, it's still super limited. These women describe it as both liberating, but at times, sometimes suffocating and oppressive. You will find accounts from the Lowell factory girls that describe, it both positively and negatively. So I want you to think that it wasn't either a positive or a negative. It was a stepping stone and an evolutionary phase is what I want you to think of. There will be labor unions associated with the Lowell factory system. Some of these female laborers organized some of our first labor strikes. I can't really speak with any detail on them. I'd be lying if I said I researched them or anything like that. I'm just trying to get you the bullet points. So let's recap the Lowell factory system again, guys. It's connected to both topics. And again, we're talking DBQ here. Market revolution and the changing role of women. I would use this evidence on both of those topics. Women, it's going to lead them to new economic opportunities. It will also lead to it being socially acceptable to be outside of the home. For the market revolution one, it simply represents the connection between, our agricultural cotton belts in the South and the need for northern industries. So it's trying to show you a connection, guys. It's not just like, oh man, Southerners are so bad for owning slaves. It's like, well, if it wasn't for northern demand for cotton, I don't know if the slave system would quite be the same. So it's in those contexts that I want you to think about the Lowell factory system. The context of what it means for women and working in labor, and what it means for the market revolution and the interconnection of goods, trade systems, and markets expanding. There is a reading that I assigned earlier this year called Civilizing the Machine. If you want more details on the Lowell factory girls, you could go back and read Civilizing the Machine. Now that everything's pass fail, I don't think anyone needs to go back and do reading notes unless it's just for your own benefit. I would encourage you to do them, but for a grade, they're not getting graded anymore, obviously. So there's no point in doing the reading notes for a grade. But again, I would recommend it, guys. It would be helpful if you're someone who really is using this time effectively to study, this quarantine time to study. That would be a good reading. Again, it's called Civilizing the Machine. It's linked on my website. We've already read it once this year. Go back and reread it. So that's our Lowell system. We know what labor unions are. We can do this super quick, guys. You know what labor unions are. They are cooperative collections of workers. Oftentimes when workers band together and agree that, hey, if we want management to change, we need to collectively act as one voice. If we want higher pay, we need to talk to management using one voice, not as individuals. And it's when we, can use our collective strength as one unified labor force when we can get concessions from the management. Oftentimes, labor unions will do things like strikes to obtain their goals. We'll talk more about labor unions, guys. I'm just trying to help you understand that they really get their start in America in the 1820s and 30s. I'm sure there are early examples outside of America, but these are going to be our first labor unions in America. It's going to be during the market revolution, 1820s and 30s. Much more detail is coming in the 1780s and 1790s. That's when we'll start talking about specific ones like the Knights of Labor and those anarchists, the IWW. We're not there yet. I'm just trying to help you understand that when you start to develop factory systems, which is what the market revolution is, when you start actually putting human beings in factory settings, a natural occurrence is going to be some dissatisfaction and then union agitation building to improve the conditions. Hopefully that makes sense. We've talked a lot about the market revolution. That was our lecture yesterday. Again, internal improvements, new technology, new productivity. All of a sudden, I live in Illinois and I can sell my stuff in New York City. How cool is that? I can use the Great Lakes and the Erie Canal to sell my stuff in Manhattan, opening up new markets. This is also overlap, guys. We also know about different public works projects. We're not quite to a subway system yet, but we are absolutely building trains. We are building public roads, and we have those canals. I don't need to say more on that. You don't need to be an expert. If you understand what the Erie Canal is and what it does, you're going to be able to hit so many of these learning targets, guys. That's why the Erie Canal is the absolute best example. I'm going to say it again a third time. Hopefully you're like, gosh, Mahoney, we get it. A farmer outside Chicago, guys, can now use the Great Lakes, the trains, and the canal system to sell his stuff in New York. And if it's non-perishable, he can sell his stuff in Europe. That is opening up new markets to that farmer in Illinois. So anyhow, and also, folks, we'll do this final learning target and call it a day. 1820s, 1830s. What's going on in Ireland? I need to hear someone else's voice. What's happening in Ireland in the 1820s and 1830s?
Potato famine?
Yeah, their potatoes got a fungus. I don't actually know that much about it. I just know I learned on Wikipedia that they got some gnarly potato fungus, and lots of Irish had to flee. I wish I could say more about the Irish fleeing of especially because I have Irish ancestry roots. I can only kind of joke about a potato famine, folks, but be aware of how significant this truly is. There will be more Irish living in New York. Or, I'm sorry, there will be more Irish living in New York City. Man, I'm going to mess the stat up. I knew this off the top of my head at one point. The number of Irish living in New York City, I believe, is only bigger, or the only city with a greater number of Irishmen than New York City is Dublin. That's what it is. So of all the cities, on Earth, the only city with more Irishmen than New York City will be Dublin, Ireland. Sorry, it took me so long to get that silly little analogy out. But be aware, folks, that we're going to see a rise of nativism. Aaron, did you have a comment?
Oh, no, I was just going to say my dad's from Northern Ireland, so if you want me to ask him about that, then I could too.
Aaron, if you would like to share anything about nativism against the Irish, I would be. I was just offer extra credit, and I can't do that anymore because everyone's passing because we're getting pass fail grades.
Yeah.
Oh, but for your own information, Aaron, you should find out as much as you can. Talk to him about it. Irish people were viewed as not white. Irish people spoke Gaelic in the 1820s and 1830s. There was a heavy amount of nativism. And so what you have to understand, guys, is the Irish population is predominantly Catholic, and that steps on the toes and infringes on the Protestant majority here. So we're going to see economic anger against the Irish. They feel like the Irish undercut, all the laborers and drive down wages, and they feel like the Irish are essentially just kind of slaves of the Pope, slaves of Rome, and they just will vote as a bloc. They're not democratic. They'll just vote however the Pope tells them, and we're going to see the rise of nativism during this period. Now, folks, you're smart enough to know that most newcomers experience nativism. The Italians will experience it. Hispanics have experienced it. Muslims have experienced it. Anyone who's a newcomer to this country has experienced it at various times. Doesn't matter what ethnic group you belong to. Sometimes it matters what skin color you have, and other times not. But be aware of what nativism is. I think it's very possible that nativism could come up on the DBQ in some way, shape, or form. Again, there's so many different eras of it, folks. When we'll see it again majorly, will be in the 19-teens and 1920s. And you know all about that. You know about the immigration increases of the industrial era. That's when my Italian ancestors arrive. And by the 19-teens, folks, the huge influx of immigrants of predominantly Southern and Eastern European origin is going to cause that push for new immigration laws. And that's when we put those really restrictive immigration quotas in the 1920s. Guys, you're never going to get a DBQ on Irish in the 1830s. You could totally get a DBQ about nativism, though, over a large period of time. You could talk about, anti-Asian nativism. Remember the Chinese Exclusion Act of the 1870s and how that'll carry over into Japanese internment on the West Coast. So be aware, you're never going to be asked to write a DBQ on Irish nativism, but I could easily see them asking you about nativism from the 1820s till 1945. I could see that happening for sure. So know what it is and just know some examples, and you should be totally fine. Sometimes I don't know how eloquent my little live streams are. I sometimes slip over my words. 7th period, 6th and 7th period always get the best lectures, but now they're starting to get a feel for what third period gets and 4th period gets. Yeah, that's all the content I've got today, folks. Let's just glance really quickly one more time at the vocabulary. Middle class, that's another outcome of the market revolution, guys. We're starting to get a new consumer class. Doesn't mean everyone's a poor factory worker. No, a lot of people are becoming middle class. That's a product of the market revolution. I can buy these goods now being created. I have money, disposable income, growing middle class. And also this vocab term might be good to know, guys, mineral-based economy, especially when you start thinking about westward expansion. Understand that a lot of American economic growth is going to be based on our natural wealth. And minerals will change in terms of what we're really, mining in great excesses, whether it's coal or petroleum or uranium in the 1940s and 50s. It'll change what our mineral wealth were, or forest and timber. But just be aware what that word means. If you see mineral-based economy, It's not like you got to be an expert, but you got to be like, oh, I know what that vocab term means. American expansion and American wealth will be heavily based on the mineral wealth of North America. And just understand that, mineral-based growth is going to be a huge part of the story. Certainly, it's not all the part of the story. The Bank of the United States and banking and lending will be a big part of it, and we'll see that when Andrew Jackson comes up in another chapter or two. So sit tight with Andrew Jackson and the economic part of our growth, but you cannot underestimate the power of the mineral base of North America to help our economy grow. So cool. I think that's all I want to say on the vocab. I'm looking up at the vocab. Yeah. I'll open up the floor to questions, guys, and then I'll go ahead and is that your cat, Em? How cute.
My cat.
Oh, that's so cute. Anyone have any questions? I'll open up the floor to anything whatsoever, guys, and then I'll stop recording as soon as we're done with that. But anyone have any questions on this content? Basically, it's market. Do you have a question on market revolution or like second great awakening? You feeling pretty comfortable with it?
But I looked it up because I was curious. But the fungus that caused the potato famine is called water mold Phyllopodia infestans.
Excellent. I bet it looks like black and gnarly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Annabelle. I hope I will remember the name of the fungus, but I don't know that I will. But I love that you looked that up. Oh, the internet. That's using the internet for good. Thanks, Annabelle.
Mahoney,
Yeah.
on the review sheet for question 18, is it like an incomplete question?
Can you read? Actually, I can pull it up, but can you read the question for me in the meantime?
It just says, how were the tensions? And then check out this video for a quick recap of the nullification crisis.
Give me 20 seconds to look, Sneath, if you don't mind. Maybe even less than that. This was classwork, period 4. And you said it was question 18?
Yeah.
I'm seeing it. How were tensions blank? Check out this video for a quick recap of the nullification crisis. You sure are right. So Madison, I didn't actually make this review sheet. I just think they're really good, and I didn't reinvent the wheel. So you don't have to do that question, but just since we're talking about it, and since the question they linked to is a nullification crisis, I can almost guarantee you what the question was. And the question probably was, how were tensions between the states and the federal government increased by the nullification crisis? So since we're talking about it, I'll just give 30 seconds on it. Remember, guys, part of what our federal government does to make money is tariffs. We don't have taxes on your income. Taxes on your income come way later, guys. Our government has to make money somehow, and they do it through tariffs. And remember what tariffs are. They're taxes on imported goods. So they're good for business, but they're not so good for the consumer, especially Southerners in this case, guys. Southerners just want the product as cheap as they can get it. I don't want to pay $10 for the American t-shirt if I can buy the British t-shirt for $6. I don't really care if it's made in America. I just want the cheapest product. Don't charge me more to subsidize some Yankee manufacturer. That was my Gone with the Wind impression, kind of. But anyhow, that's essentially what we're doing, guys. We're making Southern citizens pay more to keep Northern manufacturers afloat. Northern manufacturers can't compete with Great Britain without the tariffs. So Southerners resent them, guys. And so what South Carolina does, and this is the nullification crisis, Neath, they just try to nullify the tariff. The same way that Kentucky and Virginia tried to nullify the Alien and Sedition Act in 1800, South Carolina, led by John C. Calhoun, and this is while Andrew Jackson's president, they just straight up say, we're not paying that tariff. That's null and void in our state. We think that's unconstitutional to make us pay that, and it's null and void. We're not doing it. And then that leads to the nullification crisis. It's the standoff and the face-off between the federal government and Jackson. So I can give you more details on that, but we'll do that at a late, that's, and I don't know if you remember, Sneath, but essentially Jackson, threatens to call out the military by passing a force bill, really threatening them while simultaneously getting the tariff lowered. So he's a really shrewd politician right there. He gives them what they want, which is a much lower tariff, but he also threatens to exert federal authority. He says, you guys can't secede, guys. South Carolina threatens to leave. If you thought threatening to leave the country over slavery was kind of whack, imagine threatening to leave the country over a tariff. South Carolina, I'm not lying to you. South Carolina threatens to secede from this nation over the tariff. And Jackson threatens them with military force to keep them in the to essentially compel them to pay the tariff and keep them in the Union. But he also agrees partially with them, and he gets the tariff lowered to a rate that they find more reasonable. It's a good compromise for him. That's what that. So I bet you, Madison, that question was about tensions between the federal government and the states, because that's really what the nullification example is about. You should know lots of examples of tension between the states and the federal government, whether they're Supreme Court cases, whether they're laws, or whether they're other issues. Cool. Great question. Sorry that was incomplete. You don't have to complete it on there, but we talked it out, and that's what it was, I bet. Cool. Any other questions today, folks? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.